"Arrest that boy. He doesn't belong here," the woman shouted boldly at the young black boy Ethan. Ethan Hayes was just 12 years old, but his confidence and natural charisma lit up every room he entered. On this particular sunny afternoon, he wasn't in a room at all. He was out in the driveway of a quiet suburban neighborhood playing basketball with a group of kids his age. The rhythmic sound of the ball hitting the pavement and the joyful laughter of children filled the air. Ethan, dressed in a red basketball jersey with Thompson Eagles emblazoned across the chest, dribbled the ball effortlessly. He was agile, quick, and always smiling, weaving between the other kids as he made his way to the hoop. "Nice shot," one of the boys yelled as Ethan banked the ball perfectly into the net. The moment was pure, simple fun, at least for the kids. But not everyone saw it that way. From across the street, Victoria Grayson, a woman in her early 40s with sharp features and an air of superiority, watched from her porch. Her expression shifted from idle curiosity to something much darker, suspicion. Her gaze locked onto Ethan, and she didn't like what she saw. She stepped off her porch, her movements sharp and deliberate, her shoes clicking against the concrete as she crossed her neatly manicured lawn. She stopped at the edge of her property, her hands on her hips, her glare fixed squarely on Ethan. "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. "You don't belong here." Ethan froze for a moment, caught off guard. The other kids stopped playing too, the cheerful atmosphere dissipating in an instant. The basketball rolled to a stop, forgotten on the driveway, as all eyes turned to Victoria. Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Ethan, always polite, stepped forward slightly and said, "I'm Ethan. I'm just playing basketball with my friends." But Victoria wasn't interested in his explanation. She took a step closer, her face twisting into a sneer. "I've never seen you around here before," she snapped. "Where are you from? Who let you into this neighborhood?" Ethan hesitated, his confidence momentarily shaken. "I'm visiting my mom's friend," he explained, his tone calm but firm. "She lives right over there." He gestured toward the house behind him. Victoria scoffed, crossing her arms. "That's a likely story," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Kids like you don't just wander into neighborhoods like this. You need to leave." Ethan's heart sank. He'd been taught by his mother to always stay composed, no matter what. But standing in front of Victoria, facing her hostility, it was harder than he expected. He looked around, hoping one of the adults might come out and intervene. But the street was eerily quiet, the only sound Victoria's sharp voice echoing in the stillness. "Leave," she repeated, her tone even harsher. "I'll call the police if you don't." Ethan stood his ground, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm just playing basketball." Victoria's eyes narrowed, and she pulled out her phone. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "We'll let the police decide." Little did she know, the boy she accused of being a stranger wasn't just a visitor. He had connections far beyond her imagination. As we delve into the story, comment where you're watching from and click on the subscribe button if you love stories like this. Ethan Hayes was not your average 12-year-old. Standing at an average height for his age, with bright, curious eyes and a smile that could light up even the dullest of days, Ethan was the kind of kid who left a positive impression wherever he went. His neatly styled hair and the red and white basketball jersey he wore reflected both his love of sports and his easygoing, approachable nature. With every step he took, there was a spring in his stride, a quiet confidence that came from being raised by someone who taught him to believe in himself no matter what. Ethan wasn't just a kid who excelled at basketball. He was curious, sharp, and quick-witted, with a natural ability to connect with people. Whether he was helping a classmate with homework or holding the door open for a stranger, Ethan's kindness and thoughtfulness were impossible to miss. It was something his mom, Governor Emily Hayes, had instilled in him from an early age. She always reminded him, "You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to make a difference. Just the kindest." But Ethan's confidence wasn't something he was born with. It was something he earned. As the only child of a high-profile governor, he had grown up in the spotlight, learning how to handle both admiration and scrutiny. While many kids his age worried about the latest trends or video games, Ethan had a deeper awareness of the world around him. He admired his mom for her strength and resilience, often finding himself wishing he could be just as brave. Ethan's mom, Governor Emily Hayes, a woman who embodied grace, intelligence, and unshakable determination. Emily was in her early 40s, tall and poised, with a presence that commanded respect. Her sharp brown eyes reflected both her warmth and her ability to see through anyone's facade. Whether in a tailored navy blue suit for a press conference or a casual blouse and jeans for a quiet day with her son, Emily carried herself with dignity, never letting her position overshadow her humanity. Emily's journey to becoming a governor wasn't an easy one. She had grown up in a small town where systemic challenges often dictated the lives of people like her. Her parents, hardworking and dedicated, taught her the importance of education and resilience. Emily had faced her share of bias and exclusion growing up, but she never let it define her. Instead, she channeled those experiences into a drive to make a difference. Her political career began in her late 20s, but it wasn't just about making speeches or shaking hands. Emily was the type of leader who showed up. Whether it was fighting for school funding, advocating for healthcare reform, or standing against injustice, she pushed her heart into everything she did. It was that very determination that had earned her the respect of so many, and the love and admiration of her son. This week was supposed to be a relaxing break for the Hayes family. Emily and Ethan had traveled to visit Emily's childhood friend, Amanda Peterson, in her new suburban neighborhood. Amanda and Emily had grown up together despite being of different colors, navigating life in a small town and sharing dreams of a brighter future. Their paths had taken different directions, Amanda settling into family life in a quieter area, while Emily had gone on to become a political trailblazer. For Emily, reconnecting with Amanda felt like a breath of fresh air. Their bond had remained strong despite the years and the distance. Amanda's warm, bubbly personality was the perfect counterbalance to Emily's composed demeanor. She treated Ethan like one of her own, always quick to offer him a plate of snacks or a kind word. Ethan enjoyed spending time with Amanda's kids and the other neighborhood children. They were quick to include him in their basketball games, and he appreciated the chance to just be a kid without the pressure of living in his mom's political shadow. On this fateful day, Emily brought Ethan to Amanda's house, but she chose to ride with no security and in the best disguise as possible. All she wanted was a normal visit without anyone recognizing who she or her son Ethan was. But as much as Emily and Ethan were enjoying their visit, Emily couldn't ignore the undercurrent of discomfort she felt in the neighborhood. It wasn't anything Amanda said or did. She was as kind and welcoming as ever. But Emily had noticed the way some of the neighbors looked at her and Ethan. The glances were quick but telling, a flicker of judgment or suspicion that spoke volumes. Emily wasn't one to let these things slide, but she also knew when to pick her battles. For now, she focused on enjoying the time with Amanda and making sure Ethan felt safe and supported. She knew that as much as she could teach him resilience and fairness, the world wasn't always a fair place, and that reality often hit the hardest when you least expected it. In some communities, there are those who open their arms and those who stand guard, deciding who they believe belongs. Victoria Grayson was firmly in the latter category. In her mind, she wasn't just a resident of the neighborhood. She was its unofficial overseer. At 43, Victoria was polished to perfection, from her meticulously styled blonde bob to her tailored pastel dresses. She was the epitome of suburban affluence, and she made sure everyone around her knew it. Victoria carried herself with an air of quiet authority, the kind of person who made her presence felt even before she spoke. She would walk the neighborhood each morning, her posture stiff and her eyes scanning every detail like a hawk surveying its territory. She would notice if a lawn wasn't mowed or if a car she didn't recognize was parked on the street for too long. And when it came to people, her judgments were swift and unyielding. Victoria's idea of keeping the neighborhood safe often came at the expense of others. She would make a habit of questioning unfamiliar faces, her tone polite on the surface but dripping with suspicion. If a teenager skateboarded too close to her yard, she'd glare at them until they left. If a new family moved in, she'd subtly grill them at the community meetings, trying to figure out if they were a good fit. To Victoria, keeping control over the neighborhood's image was her unspoken job, a job she took very seriously. But where Victoria saw herself as the gatekeeper, others saw her for what she truly was, a woman with an overinflated sense of self-importance. Neighbors were polite to her face, but many avoided her when they could, rolling their eyes at her constant need to assert her dominance. Still, her presence was a fact of life in the community, an unspoken rule that everyone tolerated, but no one challenged. On the other end of the spectrum was Amanda Peterson. Amanda had only recently moved into the neighborhood with her family. Eager for a fresh start, she had spent years living in a smaller town, raising her 2 kids and focusing on family life. When her husband's new job brought them to this affluent suburb, Amanda saw it as an opportunity for her children to thrive. She loved the spacious streets, the well-kept parks, and the sense of community, or at least what she thought was a sense of community. Amanda's move to the neighborhood also brought an unexpected joy, reconnecting with her childhood best friend, Governor Emily Hayes. Amanda and Emily had grown up together, their bond forged in the small-town streets where they both faced their own challenges. Amanda admired Emily deeply, not just for her political achievements, but for her strength and integrity. Despite the years and distance, their friendship had remained rock solid. When Amanda welcomed Emily and her son Ethan into her home for a visit, she treated them like family. She fussed over Ethan, making sure he had snacks and offering to cheer him on as he played basketball with her kids. She couldn't help but feel protective of him, even though he seemed perfectly capable of holding his own. To Amanda, Ethan was like a nephew, and she wanted him to feel as comfortable in her home as her own children did. What Amanda didn't see, however, were the subtle currents of exclusion that flowed beneath the surface of her new neighborhood. She didn't notice the way Victoria Grayson looked at Ethan from her porch, her gaze sharp and calculating. Amanda had always believed the best in people, and it hadn't yet occurred to her that not everyone in the community shared her open-hearted view of the world. That afternoon, the sound of bouncing basketballs and laughter filled the air as Ethan Hayes played in the driveway with Amanda's kids and their friends. For Ethan, it was the perfect way to spend the day. No cameras, no interviews, no politics. Just the game he loved and the simple joy of being a kid. The warm sun reflected off the asphalt as the children took turns shooting hoops, their playful banter echoing through the quiet suburban street. Ethan dribbled confidently, weaving through the other kids with ease before landing a perfect shot. "That's 3 in a row," he exclaimed, grinning as one of Amanda's kids shook their head in mock defeat. "All right, Ethan, we get it. You're too good for us," one of the boys joked, and everyone burst into laughter. But not everyone shared in the kids' joy. Across the street, Victoria Grayson stood, Her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her sharp eyes locked onto Ethan, her expression souring as she watched him laugh and play. To Victoria, the scene didn't feel right. The boy didn't look familiar, and she didn't like unfamiliar faces in her neighborhood. Her gaze lingered on Ethan, her mind racing with assumptions. She didn't recognize him, and in her world, that was enough to make him suspicious. "Who is he?" she muttered under her breath, her irritation growing with each bounce of the basketball. Finally, unable to contain herself, Victoria stepped off her porch, her heels clicking against the concrete as she marched across the street. The sound of her approach was lost in the noise of the game, but when she reached the driveway, her sharp voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone harsh and accusatory. The kids stopped playing instantly, their cheerful expressions replaced with confusion. All eyes turned to Victoria, but her focus was solely on Ethan. Ethan, startled but ever polite, stepped forward slightly. "I'm Ethan," he said, his tone calm. "I'm just visiting my mom's friend. We're playing basketball." But his explanation did nothing to ease Victoria's hostility. She scoffed, her eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms. "You're visiting?" she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "I've never seen you before. Who's your mom's friend?" Ethan gestured toward Amanda's house, his voice steady. "Mrs. Peterson. My mom and Mrs. Peterson are out for lunch." Victoria's expression didn't soften. If anything, her irritation deepened. "Really?" she repeated, her tone mocking. "And you expect me to believe that? Kids like you don't just wander into neighborhoods like this. You don't belong here. If you believe that nobody should be judged wrongly because of the color of their skin, click the subscribe button now. Only those who believe people should be judged won't subscribe." Ethan's stomach tightened, but he stood his ground. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, his voice still polite but firm. "We're just playing basketball." Victoria stepped closer, her voice rising. "Well, I don't believe you," she snapped. "And if you don't leave this neighborhood right now, I'm calling the police." The other kids exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. One of Amanda's kids tried to intervene. "He's telling the truth, Mrs. Grayson," they said timidly, but Victoria silenced them with a sharp glare. "I don't need an explanation from you," she said curtly, her attention fixed on Ethan. "I've lived here long enough to know who belongs and who doesn't. And he doesn't." Ethan felt a mix of frustration and humiliation bubbling inside him, but he refused to let it show. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "Fine," she spat, pulling out her phone. "We'll let the police handle this." She dialed 911, turning away slightly as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual in my neighborhood," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's loitering in a driveway, and I think he might be up to something." "No, I don't recognize him. He doesn't belong here." Was Victoria right to call the police on Ethan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to click on the subscribe button now to enjoy more of these stories. The kids stood frozen, their eyes darting between Victoria and Ethan. One of them whispered, "Ethan, are you okay?" Ethan nodded slightly, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He could feel the weight of Victoria's assumptions pressing down on him, but he didn't let it show. A few minutes later, the sound of a police car approaching broke the uneasy silence. At the arrival of the police, the other children all ran away scared for themselves, including Amanda's children, but Ethan didn't. He knew better than to run away, because that would only make matters worse for him. Soon, 2 officers stepped out, their expressions neutral, but their presence intimidating. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, looking between Victoria and Ethan. Victoria stepped forward, her voice brimming with self-righteousness. "I called," she said. "This boy is trespassing. He says he's visiting, but I don't believe him." The officers turned to Ethan. "Is that true?" one of them asked, their tone sharp. "What are you doing here?" Ethan took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady. "I'm visiting my mom's friend, Mrs. Peterson," he explained. "We're playing basketball. I didn't do anything wrong." The officers exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. "Do you have any proof of that?" one of them asked. Ethan hesitated, the unfairness of the question stinging. The officers were ready to handcuff him and take him away if no one would defend him. He looked around, but there was no one to defend him. It was just him, the white woman, and the police officers. It was at this point he knew he needed help. But instead of arguing, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Without a word, he opened his messaging app and typed a quick message to his mom. "Mom, someone called the police on me. They're saying I don't belong here. Please come back." He hit send, his hands trembling slightly as he looked up at the officers. "My mom will be here soon," he said quietly. "She can explain everything." Ethan Hayes stood in the driveway, his hands at his sides, as Victoria Grayson continued her tirade. Her words were sharp and accusatory, each one designed to push him further into a corner. "Kids like you don't just visit," she spat, her arms crossed tightly. "You're here to cause trouble, and I won't let that happen in this neighborhood." The police officers, standing nearby, didn't intervene. Their questions had grown less direct, their unease with the situation evident, but they still lingered. Ethan kept his composure, even as Victoria's words stung. He knew better than to let her see him flinch. Instead, he focused on the vibration in his pocket, a reply from his mom, Governor Emily Hayes. "I'm on my way. Stay where you are." Across town, Emily was seated at a quiet restaurant with Amanda, sipping iced tea when she received Ethan's text. Her warm expression instantly shifted to one of razor-sharp focus. She read the message twice, her jaw tightening slightly. "Ethan just texted me," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Someone called the police on him." Amanda froze, disbelief etched across her face. "What? Why would anyone?" Emily raised a hand, silencing her. "Amanda, we're going back now," she said firmly, already standing. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, one Amanda hadn't heard in years. "What would you do if someone called the police on your child unfairly? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe now." Emily's mind raced as they drove back to the house, her fingers flying over her phone's keyboard. She sent a message to her security detail. Her tone clipped as she spoke into the phone. "I need immediate dispatch to Amanda Peterson's address. Full escort. There's been an incident involving my son." Minutes later, the quiet suburban street was disrupted by the sound of engines. The first to arrive was a sleek black SUV, its tinted windows gleaming in the sunlight. Behind it, two additional vehicles pulled up, their presence commanding attention. The neighbors who had been watching the commotion in the driveway turned their heads, their curiosity piqued. Victoria, still mid-rant, faltered slightly at the sound. She turned her head just as the car doors opened in unison. From the lead vehicle, Governor Emily Hayes stepped out without her disguise, flanked by two members of her security detail. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit and heels, she exuded authority with every step. Her expression was calm, but her gaze was unflinching, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the neighbors as recognition set in. "That's the governor," one whispered. "What's she doing here?" Victoria's confident posture crumbled in an instant. Her face paled as the realization hit her like a wave. She had just accused the son of one of the most powerful women in the state. The smug superiority that had fueled her earlier tirade vanished, replaced by a nervous stiffness as she took an involuntary step back. The police officers, who had been standing somewhat aimlessly near Ethan, straightened up immediately. Their hands moved to adjust their uniforms, and one of them stepped forward to greet Emily. Governor Hayes, he said, his voice strained. We didn't realize. Emily raised a hand, cutting him off. Save it, she said sharply, her voice carrying across the driveway. She didn't need to raise her volume. The weight of her authority was enough. Her eyes moved to Ethan, her expression softening slightly as she approached him. Are you all right? She asked gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. Ethan nodded. I'm fine, Mom, he said quietly, though the relief in his eyes was unmistakable. Satisfied that her son was safe, Emily straightened and turned her attention to Victoria. Her gaze was piercing, locking onto the woman with the kind of intensity that made everyone else step back. You must be the one who called the police, she said, her tone icy. Victoria stammered, her earlier bravado completely gone. I didn't know he was your son, she managed to say, her voice trembling. Emily took a step closer, her heels clicking against the pavement. And why should that matter? She asked, her voice rising slightly, every word deliberate. You didn't know who he was, so you decided he didn't belong here? You decided that my son, who was doing nothing but playing basketball, was a threat? Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The neighbors stood frozen, watching the confrontation unfold with bated breath. Emily turned to the officers, her voice sharp and commanding. And you, she said. Did you question why you were called here in the first place? Did you stop to think for 1 second that this might be about something other than a crime? One of the officers cleared his throat awkwardly. We were just responding to a call, ma'am, he said weakly. Emily's eyes narrowed. Responding to a call doesn't mean you leave your judgment at the door, she said. This situation never should have escalated to this point. My son was doing nothing wrong, and you allowed him to be treated as though he were a criminal. The tension in the air was palpable. Victoria, visibly shaken, tried one last time to defend herself. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's expression hardened. Protect it from what? A 12-year-old boy playing basketball? She took another step forward, her voice rising. Your bias, your assumptions, are the only things that don't belong here. And believe me, you will be held accountable for them. Victoria looked as though she might cry, but Emily didn't give her the chance to respond. She turned back to Ethan, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Let's go inside, she said firmly. As Emily led Ethan back toward Amanda's house, the neighbors remained silent, their eyes fixed on Victoria, whose once commanding presence now seemed small and insignificant. After the incident, the once peaceful suburban neighborhood found itself at the center of a storm. The confrontation between Governor Emily Hayes, her son Ethan, and Victoria Grayson became a flashpoint for discussions about bias and accountability. It didn't take long for the story to make headlines. Videos recorded by onlookers spread quickly online, sparking outrage across social media. People from all walks of life weighed in, and one thing was clear. The public was demanding change. The pressure on Victoria Grayson was immediate and intense. Her neighbors, once tolerant of her domineering personality, began to distance themselves. Many were embarrassed by the way she had represented their community. The criticisms didn't stop at the neighborhood's borders either. The viral videos showed Victoria's actions in full, and the public was unforgiving. Realizing the gravity of her actions, Victoria issued a public apology. In a shaky video posted online, she addressed her behavior. I deeply regret my actions, she said, her voice trembling. I allowed my assumptions to cloud my judgment, and in doing so I caused harm to an innocent child and his family. I am truly sorry. But the apology wasn't enough to shield her from the backlash. People saw through the words, questioning whether her regret was genuine or simply a reaction to the growing criticism. Words are easy, one comment read. Let's see actions. Another said, if she's really sorry, she should work to fix the damage she's done. Meanwhile, the police department found itself under scrutiny as well. Emily, true to her principles, refused to let the officers' handling of the situation slide. She filed an official complaint, demanding that the department take concrete steps to ensure such incidents wouldn't happen again. In response, the department announced mandatory anti-bias training for all its officers, emphasizing the importance of fair and impartial treatment for everyone, regardless of appearance or background. In the neighborhood, change was already underway. Amanda Peterson, shaken by the incident, took it upon herself to foster a more inclusive environment. She worked closely with Emily to organize community events that brought people together, regardless of their backgrounds. Block parties, cultural festivals, and neighborhood meetings became the norm, creating spaces where families could connect and learn from one another. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was meaningful. Families who once kept to themselves began to open up, and new friendships were formed. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to feel like the welcoming place Amanda had hoped it would be. For Ethan, the experience was a turning point. One evening, as he sat with his mom on the porch, he reflected on everything that had happened. "Mom," he said quietly, "I was so scared at first. I didn't know what to do." Emily looked at him, her expression soft but firm. "And what did you do?" she asked gently. Ethan paused, thinking about it. "I stood my ground," he said finally. "I stayed calm, even when it was hard." Emily smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's right," she said. "You always told me to stand tall no matter what." Ethan continued, his voice growing steadier. "I'm glad I did." Emily's smile widened. "The world isn't always fair," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "But we don't back down. That's how we make it better." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He felt a newfound sense of strength, a deeper understanding of the values his mom had always tried to instill in him. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to stand up, not just for himself, but for something bigger. Weeks later, the neighborhood looked and felt different. The once stiff air of exclusivity had softened, replaced by a sense of openness and connection. Families gathered outside, chatting and laughing as kids played together in the streets. The driveway where the incident had occurred was now a hub of activity, filled with the sounds of bouncing basketballs and happy voices. Ethan was back in the driveway, a basketball in his hands. But this time, he wasn't just playing with Amanda's kids. He was surrounded by new friends, kids from all over the neighborhood who had come to see him as one of their own. He dribbled the ball with ease, weaving between players before making a perfect shot. His teammates cheered, and Ethan's grin stretched from ear to ear. From the porch, Emily watched the game, her heart swelling with pride. Amanda sat beside her, smiling as she sipped from a glass of lemonade. "It's amazing how much has changed in just a few weeks," Amanda said, her tone filled with gratitude. Emily nodded, her gaze never leaving Ethan. "It just takes a little courage," she said. "Courage to stand up and say, 'This isn't right,' and people will listen." Amanda smiled. "Well, they listened to you, Emily. And this neighborhood is better for it." As the game continued, the sounds of laughter and cheers filled the air. Ethan glanced back at the porch and caught his mom's eye. He gave her a small wave, and she waved back, her smile filled with warmth and encouragement. The moment was simple, but it was profound. It was a testament to the progress they had made, not just as a family, but as a community. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was better. And for Ethan and Emily, that was more than enough. If you believe in standing up for equality and fairness, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful and thought-provoking stories like this one. Share this video with your friends and family. Together, we can make a difference. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.